I've marked the center of the tapered end, and then I've got a piece of wood with a small nail that'll go into that center of the tapered end. Now I can adjust this fence to get whatever taper I want, including where it'll start and how much will be cut off at the end. And because this edge of the base was cut with the blade by sliding the sled when it was made, I can use it as an indicator of where the cut will occur. So now that the fence is positioned and locked, I will clamp in place this board, which will be handy later. As the piece is rotated, it'll always be at the same center point. One problem with this type of clamp is it's putting all the pressure on one edge rather than in the center. So that tends to rock the piece up a bit. And an easy solution to that is to simply put a strip of wood where you want the pressure to be and then tighten up the clamps. These clamps do not have to be over tightened. Just a little pressure and that holds it very securely. I'm using this clip-on in-feed support because the sled is very long and it would fall off the table. I'll put a link below on how to make that. I'll rotate the piece of the wood for the next taper cut, and I'm going to take advantage of that little nail in the hole to get everything perfectly lined up again. And now the benefit of that little nail is really coming into play because I've got a tapered edge here, so I can't simply push it against the fence. That would throw everything off, but the nail keeps me perfectly lined up. The fourth taper is the most interesting because when I put that in with my nail, I've got a gap under here, so I can't even clamp down on that. Okay, I've got one end supported by the clamp, and that's on the portion that does not have any taper on it at the top of the leg. The other end is supported by the nail, and then I've got a taper that was a cutoff from another edge, and I've got a piece of wood that is the same thickness as the kerf of the saw blade, 1/8 of an inch. So I'll slip that in and slip in this wedge. They just go in nice without much pressure. And now I've got good support here so that I can actually clamp down without all the force going onto the nail. So a check on how we did. The taper is centered around the original center of the piece. The diagonal lines are intersecting perfectly. The taper cuts are very smooth, and that's because the jig has no play in it. It moves perfectly along the blade, and it's working like a jointer. I'm just using a 40-tooth general purpose blade. It's not a glue line rip blade or anything like that, and getting that excellent result. I'll put a link below showing how I set the fence precisely to get this perfect fit. The runner is made of teak wood, which has a very low coefficient of change in dimension with humidity. The growth rings are running vertically here, and that gives the lowest change in dimension with humidity because it's the radial direction of the tree growth rather than the tangential. The runner is 3/8 of an inch thick. That's slightly less than the depth of the miter slot. So I put a piece of cardboard underneath to raise it up so that this will be just slightly above the surface of the table. I'm applying packing tape so that the glue won't get onto the metal table. And I'm just pressing this down to make sure I got a really good bond. Now I'm just cutting along the edge here so that I can remove the tape that's over the wood. I'll just give one more shot to get that tape bonded down well to the table. I'm setting the fence close to the blade and then lower the blade. I don't want too much glue because then it'll just squeeze out all over. Now I can drop my base on and use the fence as a guide to line it up, and then I'll apply this weight to hold it down. Okay, that fits in there with no play, and yet it can slide pretty good. Now I can use the runner in the miter slot to trim off the base. and secured the T-bolt in place with epoxy. So there's the T-bolts coming through the top of the base. They go onto the fence, and that allows the angle of the taper to be set, as well as the size of the piece of wood. One thing I want to point out is that when I'm at the maximum amount here, the piece of wood hits the knob, and then I have to use a nut to lock the fence in place. So that doesn't bother me, but if you don't like it, then make your fence piece a little bit wider so that it can handle the total amount of the knob. I arranged the fence so that there's a little more than 2.5 inches here. That means I could do a 2.5 inch square leg. 2.5 inches is kind of the maximum, because when I add the 1/2 inch to the base, that would give 3 inches. A 10-inch table saw, the blade can go to about 3 1/8. Now these slots I made 3/8 inch wide to go with 5/16 bolts so that I could get some pivoting without it binding. And what I did is I cut the slots first, and then I located this and then marked the holes for the 5/16 studs and drilled them through. I've got a handle at this end to make it easy and safe to push the sled through without getting near the blade. And then over here, fulcrum for clamp, and with this T-track I can then pull down on that and it creates a lever.